On Monday, the Secretary of State published on their Twitter account, "We're bringing Ukraine closer to and then into NATO." And all this is, things that are talking about the July summit that's coming. It's going to be in Washington, D.C. It's going to be, I believe it's the 75th anniversary of the NATO alliance that was formed. Of course, we're going to make a big production of it. And, how embarrassing would it be if by the time we get this thing in there, the Ukrainian army is crumbling and collapsing in nearly 2.5 years of the best efforts of Western nations, especially NATO and the United States, are not going well. And in fact, that is going to be the case. But it looks like they're trying to forestall that. Instead of taking things rationally and logical, we're still talking about bringing Ukraine into NATO. And listen, how many times have I shown you on here graphic evidence that bringing Ukraine into NATO was probably the last line that was crossed that caused Putin to decide to use force in the first place? But what we're talking about right now is what the Western alliance is going to do. What is the American side going to do? Now, on the same day that the Secretary of State put that tweet out, the Secretary of Defense was trying to answer a question at a press conference. Can Ukraine attack Russian forces on the Russian side of the border with American weapons? Here's what Secretary Austin had to say.
We have been clear about providing Ukraine the ability to defend its sovereign territory. And again, the dynamics of an aerial engagement, I leave it up to the experts, but certainly, our expectation is that they continue to use the weapons that we provided on targets inside of Ukraine. Now, the aerial dynamics a little bit different, and so, but again. Don't want to speculate on any one or any type of engagement here at the podium. So,
it's off limits or not off limits?
So, final question. We'll go here.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
I mean, look, I know what the right answer should be, but whatever the right answer or whatever the accurate answer actually is, it's just embarrassing to see the Secretary of Defense afraid to say the right answer, to say the truth, whatever it is. Love him or hate him, the Secretary of Defense during the Bush administration when they went into Iraq, I mean, he was never shy about saying what he thought, even if it made people mad. At least you knew where he stood for other than when he was lying. But okay, we'll forget about that. That's not a good example, I guess. But he didn't hesitate to talk, and it made you think that he was in charge. And I guess, if anything, he deserves a little credit for that, because right now you have the Secretary of Defense won't answer a simple question. Does the United States give permission to Ukraine to use weapons, our weapons, against Russian targets on the Russian side of the border? It's a very straightforward question, and there's an answer. Either it's yes or no. There's no equivocation on it. There's no gray zone in this one. This isn't one of those. This is either they do or they don't. And if we've given it to them privately, then just say so. Because whether you say so or not, and they do it, it'll be self-evident on the ground that the targets are going to be struck on the Russian side. And if they don't strike targets, well, then that's also going to be self-evident. Why not just say it? Why do you have to equivocate and just stumble all over yourself? And then when given one last opportunity to answer the question, you literally just turn your eyes and don't want to answer that question. I just don't understand it. And again, this gets back to a whole thing of what are you trying to accomplish here? Do you want to make things good for the United States? Do you want to preserve our national security? Do you want to prevent the United States getting sucked into a war, God forbid, if it should escalate into nuclear conflict? I mean, the answer should be self-evident. It should be quite obvious. Yes, that should be 101. I mean, somebody who's interning at the State Department should know the answer to that. Why is it that our senior diplomat is going in a direction that does not accomplish that objective, doesn't even seem to be seeking that objective? Instead, we're going, I know that we should be trying to prevent war, that we should be trying to protect ourselves, but I'm going to keep going down this path of fiction here because that's what I'd prefer. I would think it would be cool if we could beat Russia. But here's the thing, you're not going to. And to continue making those statements that Secretary of State did, that they're going to come into NATO, whether it's going to happen in this July summit, of course it's not. The very possibility of bringing Ukraine into NATO was what set this whole thing off on the beginning, as John Mearsheimer has frequently said right here on our show.
If you go back to April 2008, when we made the decision to bring Ukraine into NATO, we set and train a disastrous set of policy consequences. And we are going to live with these consequences for a long time to come. Again, disastrous consequences. That decision was remarkably foolish. If we had not decided to bring Ukraine into NATO, it's very important to understand this. Ukraine would be intact today. I believe that Crimea would still be part of Ukraine. And we wouldn't have all of these problems in Eastern Europe that we now have.
After we supported the overthrow of the legally elected government because we didn't like them because they were pro-Russia.
Yeah, well, we were interested in bringing Ukraine into NATO, and we were interested in overthrowing the Yanukovych government because we saw it as pro-Russian, and we wanted to install a government in Kyiv that was pro-American. And this has just led to unending trouble.
Now, that's what started this whole situation. Where are we now? Okay, let's look back at the other side of the equation again. Let's look back at the Russian side again. So now, as I've mentioned at the top of the show, Russia is now moving forces into the northern part of Ukraine again, north of Kharkiv city. Now, as I think I've told you early on, that my initial analysis of this situation and up to the time I'm making this video is that Russia has not allocated enough troops to actually put threat into Kharkiv city. But what they are doing is to having enough troops, especially because of the historically corrupt, terrible thing that the Ukraine forces did and the Ukraine government did of failing to even build their defenses. That is shocking. And that should have been headline news. I guess I need to just stop a minute and camp on that. It is shocking that the Ukraine side was so corrupt that the billions of dollars that we've given them was never used in large of those parts to build the defenses for which we gave it. They've been saying for months now, many months, to much fanfare on television and other kinds of media that they've been putting out, that the Ukraine side has been building these elaborate, tough defenses, and now we know it was all fiction, that the money was just being laundered into somebody else's pockets. And I haven't heard to this day, where are all of those companies and those heads and those CEOs of the companies that were claimed to have done this job with our money and didn't do it? Why are they not on trial? Why are they not already in jail? And of course, that's just our financial situation. For the Ukraine side, it's far worse, because now men are dead and many more are going to die because they didn't have any defenses at all in many of these areas where the Russians came across. That should be a huge scandal. And instead, no one even wants to talk about it. Instead, all they're saying is, well, Russia's probably not going to be able to take Kharkiv. Well, that doesn't appear to be their objective. In fact, when asked about it just a couple of days ago, Vladimir Putin had this to say.
Что касается того, что происходит на Харьковском направлении, это тоже их вина, потому что они обстреливали и продолжают, к сожалению, обстреливать жилые кварталы приграничных территорий, включая Белгород. Ну, там же гражданские люди гибнут. Все же очевидно, стреляют прямо по центру города, по жилым кварталам. И я говорил публично, что если это будет продолжаться, мы вынуждены будем создать зону безопасности, санитарную зону. Вот мы это и делаем. А что касается Харькова, то таких планов на сегодняшний день нет.
Now, he means that right now. What he said there is accurate as of the moment here, because it is evident that they have not applied enough troops to take Kharkiv city. They would have to, I bet, no fewer than 200,000 if they actually wanted to take Kharkiv city of like over 1 million people. It's that big. It would take something like that in a long time to do. I think that the more likelihood is that he's doing what he said he was going to do, and that is he's trying to build this cordon to push far enough south that they get the Belgorod city. And if you're not aware of what he's talking about there, that is one of the cities where the Ukraine side has been launching raids into, just attacking mostly civilian targets in that area. They've certainly been attacking civilian parts of the city for most of the duration of the war, maybe the last year and a half, 2 years worth. They didn't do it at the beginning, but they've been doing it ever since, where they are just shelling the city areas. They've done the same thing in Donetsk. And of course, we only pay attention when the Russians attack the Ukrainian cities and hit their civil infrastructure, but we don't care when they do it to Russia. But double standards has never been anything we've been accused of not doing. So be that as it may, even though we can say, well, yeah, they do it, so why shouldn't Russia do it? That's neither here nor there, because bottom line is, what is going to cause the war to continue on? What's going to cause the war to end? That's going to cause the war to continue on. So whether you're talking about Secretary Austin saying, all right, we're going to continue to do things that just kind of keep poking Russia and then causing them to now take this action. Because if Belgorod wasn't being shelled, then Kharkiv City would not be going down right now either. So that's crucial to understand. That doesn't appear to be in the war plans initially of Russia. But because the city of Belgorod was shelled, now then he's wanting to put Kharkiv City in the vice. So he's going to try to move the line south so that the Ukrainian cannons can no longer reach Belgorod City, and his cannons, the Putin's cannons, can reach Kharkiv City. So he's just going to move the dynamics and move it south. That's harming Ukraine. Has nothing to do with the outcome of the war. That's already solved. That's already in the things that who has the most air power, air defense, engineering support, manpower, industrial capacity, overwhelmingly and irrevocably on the Russian side. That's what's going to determine who wins the war. How long it's going to take depends on how fast Russia wants to push, how much risk they want to take, or if they're going to go heavy with the firepower and are content to let it take a long time. The outcome isn't going to change. The only outcome thing it's up for grabs to try to figure out how many Ukrainian people are going to die before we get to that point. If our objective at the national level, if President Biden's objective is to end the war on the best terms available and preserve American national security, preserve as much life in Ukraine as he can, then the course of action needs to be seeking a negotiated settlement. Now, I saw a clip from Anthony Blinken about a week or so ago where he came out and said, well, we would seek a negotiated settlement if Putin wants to, but he never wants to.
Finally, in terms of negotiations, these, again, are decisions for Ukraine to make, not the United States or not any other country. So if I imagine that if Putin showed any interest in seriously engaging in negotiations, I'm sure Ukrainians would respond to that. But what Putin is demonstrating every single day is exactly the opposite. But fundamentally, these are questions for Ukraine to answer. We've been very clear. We support Ukraine. We support Ukraine in its decisions, and there will not be, never will be anything about Ukraine without Ukraine.
But then we find out here recently where Putin, again, for like the 5th or 6th or 25th time, says, no, I'm still, even from a position of military advantage right now, from all those categories I just showed you, his advantage, he's still openly willing to negotiate. Check this out.
Добиться стратегического положения не получилось, но нате вам вот теперь вот наши условия. С дуба рухнули, что ли? С какой стати-то? Сук, на котором сами сидят. Глупость ужасная. Ну, им никак не остановиться. Теперь, значит, запищали, давайте там срочно конференцию. Пожалуйста. Россия будет участвовать? Мы готовы участвовать в мирных переговорах. Но мы вас не приглашаем. Вот те, ну, здрасте, приехали.
Yeah, so Putin is willing to have a negotiated settlement. He's always said that. He's said it during the Tucker Carlson interview. I mean, he said it many times. The bottom line is that he has been consistent from the beginning with actions in 2022, 2023, now here in 2024, that he wants to negotiate a settlement. So why do you have Americans lying and saying that he doesn't even want it when he himself repeats it ad nauseum, even though he's successfully winning? That shows you what he really does want is security for his country. He really does not want to conquer all of Ukraine. He certainly doesn't want to go into NATO. He's not even interested in that. He doesn't have the capacity to do it, even if he did want it. Even if he lost his mind and wanted to become a czar of Europe or some crazy thing like that, he can't because he doesn't have the military capacity. It would take a decade of excessive service after the war was over to build up a force big enough to do that. And if you ever see him building that up, then you've got plenty of time to take action to prevent that and to deter him from doing so. But right now, and in the foreseeable future, he doesn't have the capacity to do it. So let's just get the fiction off the table and at least deal with the reality that we have here. Folks, we can end this war. It doesn't have to go on. Ukraine is never going to win it. And to keep going with the fiction harms American national security. It harms European national security. And it harms, of course, most of all, Ukrainian national security and their future. And we spend a lot of money. We're using lots of army gear, ammunition, and stuff. That can all be replaced. the Ukrainian people, the ones that we claim to care about the most, they can't replace the lost men. They've lost a generation already, and it's growing by the day. You can't replace that. It's going to take another generation, 25, 50 years to replace what they've lost here, just to get back to where they are now. And I don't know how they're going to make it in the meantime, because they're already having a hard time even keeping their limited economy of growth. At the same time, they're trying to pull new kids into the fight so that they can go and pointlessly sacrifice their lives too, because we want to keep fiction going alive. I just find it so egregious that we care so little about the Ukrainian people who were so unwilling or unable to see plain reality. So this is not hard. And I know sometimes you hear a lot of this stuff and you see these quotes I have from these various people, and you hear the obvious things, and we put the facts out on the ground here, and you think, they can't be stupid. I don't know. I don't think that they're stupid, but it does deeply trouble me that with such clearly identified factors, things that are so self-evident, even to someone who's never been in the military before, you don't have to be an expert to be able to see some of the things. You just have to be willing to see what's true and what's real and on the ground. Put this on tweets to the Secretary of State. Send this to the Secretary of Defense. Send it to your congressman. Send it to the social media accounts of some of these people who love Ukraine, but say, if you love Ukraine, why are you following something that's harming Ukraine? Let's get the word out there, because every day that passes without action is another day that some large number of Ukrainian men are forever erased from the earth. And it just grieves me to see that. And I hope you'll help me out there. We're doing everything we can. I ask you to do everything you can as well. Thanks. Please like and subscribe. And like I say, share this to everybody. And I'll see you as soon as I can get back from our regular studios in Washington, D.C. on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.